And now to part two of our continuing series, Obama and the World, a look at the president's foreign policy successes and failures in the years since he took office. Tonight we focus on Africa, a continent of approximately 1 billion people from more than 50 countries. America's first African-American president visited there last summer to great fanfare. To discuss the president and Africa, we are joined by Sergio Ba, a senior fellow at New York University's Center on International Cooperation, and Amira Woods, co-director of the program Foreign Policy in Focus at the Institute of Policy Studies in Washington. Welcome to you both.
Good to be with you.
Let's begin. Of course, it's been 1 year now since President Obama took office, and I'm wondering, Amira, let me start with you. How do Africans view his presidency so far?
Tremendous excitement and praise for Africa's son being in the White House, but a lot of concern and trepidation, primarily because the policies really have not changed dramatically from Bush to Obama. Clearly, on the issue of U.S. militarism, there is a continuation of a U.S. Africa command. There is still a steady flow of U.S. military equipment to the continent, weapons to the continent. On the issues of climate, Africa is at the epicenter of climate change, and yet there is concern that the Obama administration has not done all that it can do to bring the international community to a deal in Copenhagen and beyond Copenhagen. And of course, on the economic end, there is a sense that Africa's resources are being extracted at all cost, and that the people on the continent, those in communities on whose land those resources lie, are still being marginalized, are still being seen as invisible, even with Obama in the White House.
Sergio, I guess that Amira has sort of pointed out the disappointments there. What successes would we point to on the part of this administration?
Well, I would start by saying I wouldn't characterize those as disappointments. They are more of concerns. I just got back from a 3-week tour of West Africa, where it is evident that there is still a great deal of hope, and I would say President Obama has a great deal of political capital unspent on the continent, and but in terms of successes, to me, I think one of the biggest success cases is the fact that in his first year as a president, he visited the continent, and we saw the Secretary of State visit, spent 10 days on the continent and visited over 7 countries. This was quite significant, and the message that came out of the visits of the president and the Secretary of State, to me, was the issue of partnership, that we are moving from one of patronage to one of partnership. Now, that there can be different interpretations of that, but I think there is a significant message in the fact that the U.S. administration now looks to Africa and talk about partnerships instead of patronage.
There is, of course, though, a great deal of concern that does seem to be focused upon the security issue of Africa. And much of this has been driven, though, by events outside of this country, not necessarily by the hand of the administration. But we take a look at Somalia and the questions there of the precarious nature of security, and then also because of the bombing or attempted bombing of an American airliner at Christmas time by a Nigerian. I'm wondering, is the U.S., we are obviously focused because of these threats against the United States. Does Africa see itself as potentially a growing threat to the United States? Amira?
Clearly, the Obama administration put forward that this notion of a global war on terrorism would be challenged, and in rhetoric, the words have gone out of the policies of the administration. But in reality, that framework remains in place. So there is almost still a sense that the priorities for the Obama administration are in seeking extremists, seeking those terrorists wherever they may be. And increasingly, in the case of Africa, whether it is Somalia or Sudan or Nigeria, there are many countries that now are finding a steady flow of U.S. armaments in those countries in the so-called pursuit of extremists and terrorists. So I think there's a concern, particularly by civilians, that there is still a militarized hand of the U.S. Putting forward, in spite of an Obama administration, that it is still a militarized approach to countries like Somalia that may well need more diplomacy, may well need greater economic development in order for peace to be able to flourish.
Sergio, the Chinese have made great inroads, especially economically, into Africa. And I'm wondering if the United States is focused so much on the security issue that it may not be focusing enough on the economic possibilities with Africa. What do you think?
I think, I mean, we saw some significant shifts with regards to Secretary of State Clinton's visit. If you look at all the countries he visited, the bulk of them were countries where you have significant Chinese investments. This, to me, was a clear message that the U.S. is moving from the rhetoric of talking about China penetrating Africa and just, ripping off the resources to taking a pragmatic approach by trying to counter Chinese influence. I mean, the Secretary of State was in Angola, was in Nigeria, was in Kenya. These are all countries with significant Chinese investments, and I think clearly we are seeing that the U.S. is taking the Chinese presence on the continent as real, and they seem to be trying to adopt some pragmatic approaches to try and counter the influence of the Chinese, to move away from the rhetoric that has characterized the past decade.
Well, clearly, countering China, controlling oil, these have been the anchors of U.S. foreign policy since before the Obama administration and remain now. The question is, what's to come? Will this decade continue to be one in which the U.S. puts out a rhetoric of partnership, but doesn't necessarily put forward that open hand that's needed to build up economies that are thriving on the continent, that meet the interests of Africa's people?
Sergio, quickly, what do you think the future holds?
I am quite optimistic, but I'm also, pragmatic given the challenges here in the U.S. and in Afghanistan and places like Iraq. The challenges are quite enormous, but I think I would like to add that, the president has a great deal of political capital that is unspent on the continent, and he should be focusing on at least having a legacy 4 years into his presidency.
Sergio Ba, Amira Woods, thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.